What if the first real test of Japan's new hypersonic missiles isn't a drill, but a Chinese carrier group pushing through the Miyako Strait, and Tokyo has to decide in minutes whether to pull the trigger? That's the nightmare scenario keeping planners in Tokyo and Beijing awake at night. Japan is pouring roughly $6.2 billion into a family of long-range carrier-killing missiles designed for one purpose: make it too dangerous for Chinese carriers to ever break out into the Pacific. In this video, we're going to unpack what Japan is building, how it's meant to crack Chinese carrier defenses, and whether this hypersonic trap really can stop a rising naval superpower. To understand why Japan is spending this kind of money, you have to start with geography and timing. China's navy is surging in both size and ambition, with new carriers like Shandong and Fujian aimed at projecting power far beyond the South China Sea. But every single Chinese carrier that wants to reach the wider Pacific has to slip through narrow gaps in the so-called first island chain choke points, like the Miyako Strait between Okinawa and Miyako, and routes south of Taiwan. For decades, Japan relied on escorts, submarines, and US backing to watch those lanes. That's no longer enough when Beijing can send multiple carrier strike groups to sea at once. So Tokyo is quietly rewriting its doctrine. Instead of chasing carriers with ships and jets, it wants to turn those choke points into static kill zones, where anything large and Chinese that passes through can be hit from over the horizon by missiles sitting safely on Japanese soil. At the heart of that plan is a weapon with a name that sounds clinical, but a purpose that's anything but: the hypervelocity gliding projectile, or HVGP. On paper, it's a ground-launched hypersonic strike system. In practice, it's Japan's answer to the question, how do you hurt a carrier strike group that thinks it's untouchable? The idea is simple. A solid fuel booster hurls a glide vehicle high into the upper atmosphere. Then that vehicle skips and dives back down toward its target at hypersonic speed faster than 5 times the speed of sound, with the ability to jink and maneuver on the way in. Unlike a classic ballistic missile that follows a predictable arc, a hypersonic glider can alter course mid-flight, forcing defending radars and interceptors to chase something that keeps refusing to fly in a straight line. Japan's early HVGP blocks focus on anti-ship roles. The glide body is designed to carry a specialized warhead meant to punch through a carrier's deck or critical spaces, not just scorch paint or wreck antennas. Launchers are truck-mounted, so the batteries can disperse across Japan's southwestern islands, hide in terrain, and shoot and scoot before counterfires can find them. In a crisis, those trucks don't have to move far. If you deploy them on Kyushu or further down the Ryukyu chain, their reach stretches deep into the East China Sea and covers the corridors a Chinese carrier must traverse to reach the Pacific. Add in satellite navigation, inertial guidance, and terminal seekers focused on ship signatures, and you get a weapon that, in theory, can pick out a carrier inside a moving, defended formation. But hypersonics alone aren't the whole story. Japan is pairing HVGP with a very different kind of missile, the Extended Range Type 12 Surface-to-Ship Missile. Where HVGP is about raw speed and penetration, Type 12 is about distance, stealth, and flexibility. It's a turbojet cruise missile that flies at subsonic speed, hugging the sea surface to stay below radar horizon. The upgraded versions massively extend range compared to older coastal defense missiles, pushing their reach out hundreds of miles. That means batteries stationed on Japan's outer islands don't just guard the beaches, they can threaten ships far out at sea, long before they're in position to launch aircraft against Japanese territory. The real trick is how Japan wants to use these missiles together. Type 12 isn't just fire and forget. With mid-course update capability, these missiles can receive new target data while they're already inbound. If a carrier alters course, launches decoys, or tries to hide behind escorts, updated coordinates can be pushed to the missile in flight. Japan can queue those updates from a mix of sources: maritime patrol aircraft, ground-based radars, and eventually more advanced drones and space-based sensors. In effect, Type 12 becomes a long-range networked spear that can be re-aimed in real time, turning the whole kill chain into a flexible, software-driven system instead of a one-shot guess. Layer HVGP on top of that, and you start to see the concept: mixed salvos. In a crisis, Japan doesn't fire a missile at a carrier. It fires waves. Hypersonic gliders, diving in from high altitude, sea-skimming cruise missiles coming in low, different speeds, different angles, different radar signatures. A Chinese carrier group's defenses of its destroyers, frigates, fighters, and close-in guns are impressive, but they're finite. Each ship carries only so many interceptors. Every radar can only track so many targets at once. Every weapons officer has to make hard choices: shoot at the glider that might hit in seconds, or the cruise missile that's still over the horizon but may be part of a larger swarm. That's where the math quietly turns in Japan's favor. Imagine a carrier group with a handful of escorts, each with a few dozen long and medium-range surface-to-air missiles ready in their vertical launch cells. On paper, that might be over 100 shots. Now imagine Japan launching hypersonics from dispersed ground batteries, while F-2 fighters and surface ships trigger Type 12 salvos from different directions. Even a relatively small number of Japanese launchers can produce a triple-digit incoming count if they fire in a coordinated window. If Chinese defenses knock down half, or even 3/4, that still leaves dozens of leakers bearing down on the group. And defending in a narrow sea lane like the Miyako Strait, where maneuver room is constrained and land-based sensors can see much of what you do, makes the defender's job even harder. Of course, this isn't a one-sided game. Chinese carrier groups aren't helpless punching bags. Their outer ring relies on fighters flying combat air patrol, trying to kill launch platforms and shoot down missiles at long range. Surface combatants carry their own layered air defenses and electronic warfare suites, attempting to jam seekers, spoof targeting, and throw off guidance. Close-in weapon systems and short-range missiles create a last-ditch wall of steel around high-value ships. Beijing is also pushing its own hypersonic programs and long-range anti-ship missiles, aiming them at US and allied ships to keep them at arm's length. In a real conflict, you wouldn't just see Japanese missiles flying one way. You'd see a brutal exchange of long-range fires across the whole theater. This is where Japan's broader concept comes into play. The missile arsenal isn't meant to fight alone. It's meant to integrate with US forces, Japanese air power, undersea assets, and a growing web of unmanned systems. Japan's drone wall concept, deploying swarms of relatively cheap aerial and surface drones along key approaches, adds another layer. Those drones can act as scouts, feeding targeting data back to missile battery. They can also soak up enemy interceptors and attention, forcing defenders to waste expensive missiles on low-value target. When you combine that with fast jets, submarines, and allied assets in the area, Chinese commanders risk becoming overloaded by data and threats in every direction. Strategically, the goal is less about guaranteeing kills and more about shaping behavior. If you're in Beijing, and you know that pushing a carrier group through the Miyako Strait exposes it to coordinated, long-range strikes from land-based hypersonics and cruise missiles, you have to ask, is it worth it? Do you reroute? Do you wait until you can suppress those missile sites, knowing that attacking Japanese territory likely brings the US fully into the fight? Do you hold your carriers back and rely more on land-based aircraft and missiles instead? Every one of those choices constrains your options. That's exactly what Tokyo wants. Make the cost and risk of using carriers in that corridor so high that the easy path to the Pacific isn't easy anymore. But this approach comes with its own risks. Building missiles that can reach into contested seas and potentially hit targets near an adversary's coast blurs the line between defensive and offensive. Neighbors see Japan not just as a shield, but as a spear that, under the right political conditions, could be used for preemptive or retaliatory strikes far from its shores. That perception can fuel arms races. China responds with more carriers, more missiles, more counter-hypersonic research. Other regional players watch and decide they need similar tools. The result is a region where everyone is more heavily armed, warning times are shorter, and the consequences of a miscalculation are much higher. There's another dimension to consider: cost effectiveness. Japan's missile-centric approach fundamentally shifts the economics of naval warfare. A single Chinese aircraft carrier represents decades of engineering, billions in construction costs, and thousands of trained personnel. Losing one isn't just a tactical setback, it's a strategic catastrophe that would reverberate through Beijing's entire military calculus. Meanwhile, Japan's truck-mounted launchers and relatively affordable missiles present a different equation. Even if several launchers are destroyed in counterstrikes, the overall system remains viable. This asymmetry matters because it means Japan doesn't need to match China ship for ship or dollar for dollar. It just needs to make the risk unacceptable. So, does Japan's $6.2 billion hypersonic arsenal really give it the ability to sink Chinese carriers? In a controlled test environment with clean data and cooperative targets? Probably yes. In a chaotic, electronic warfare-saturated real fight? Nothing is guaranteed. What the arsenal does do, however, is dramatically raise the odds that any Chinese carrier group trying to force its way through key choke points would suffer serious damage, or at least believe it might. And sometimes, belief is enough. If Chinese commanders doubt they can get through without unacceptable losses, those missiles will have done their job without ever leaving their launchers. Here's where you come in. In your own wargame scenario, who holds the advantage in the first real clash around the Miyako Strait, the hypersonic-backed island chain, or the carrier group with layered defenses and its own long-range weapons? Drop your analysis in the comments below and tell me your top 3 reasons why. I'm going to be pinning and featuring the most insightful assessments in the next video, so take your time and make your case. And one more question to spark the debate. Over the next decade, do you think carrier groups stay at the center of naval warfare? Or do land-based hypersonic and cruise missile networks, like Japan's, quietly push them into a secondary role? Let me know where you stand, because the answer to that question may decide which countries are actually dominant at sea in the 2030s. If you found this analysis valuable, consider liking the video to help the algorithm surface this content to others interested in defense, technology, and geopolitical strategy. Subscribe to the channel for more in-depth examinations of military capabilities, strategic competition, and emerging weapons systems. And if you know someone who follows naval warfare or Indo-Pacific security issues, share this video with them. These conversations matter more when more people are informed. I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you in the next analysis.